Welcome to this deep dive into the art of war. You've given us a really fascinating mix of sources here. Like, we've got excerpts straight from Sun Tzu himself, and then we've got commentary from a 1910 English translation of The Art of War,
Wow.
and then snippets from other historical and modern texts about war.
Yeah.
So it's really
It's a journey.
it's like a journey through time.
Yeah, through time. Yeah. We're going to be able to explore the principles themselves and then see how people have interpreted them and how they've applied them in different eras.
Exactly. And our mission is to kind of like unpack the core of Sun Tzu's warfare strategy and see how it's played out throughout history and maybe
Yeah.
even find some surprising applications of his wisdom to our modern world today. But before we even get into the specifics of Sun Tzu, your sources bring up something pretty important, defining war itself.
Right. Yeah. And it's not just about, battles and bloodshed. It's a calculated act. It has a defined objective.
Hmm.
And one of your sources, the historian Lecky, wrote that war kindles, quote, destructive and combative passions in men, as fierce as a hound hunting a fox to its death.
Wow.
He emphasizes that deception is key in war.
Deception. That's kind of a curveball. I mean, it's certainly not how war is usually portrayed, especially in movies, the heroic scenes where soldiers are just like charging into the battle without a second thought.
Yeah. It's a far cry from historical reality. Mud disease and famine, those are the constant companions of war, according to your sources.
Oh, wow.
But here's where it gets interesting. One source argues that the best way to prevent war is to understand how to win it.
Mm.
And that brings us to Sun Tzu.
Yeah, he definitely was not naive about the realities of war, but he offered a way to think about it strategically. Instead of focusing on brute force, he was all about calculation.
Yeah. His principles are like a roadmap for navigating conflict.
Yeah.
And you've included some great excerpts from his text. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. One of his most famous quotes.
It's so fascinating how a principle from centuries ago still holds up in our data-driven world. It's like he was onto something with the power of information.
Absolutely. I mean, today, knowing yourself and your enemy could mean anything from in-depth market research for a business to comprehensive data analysis in a political campaign, or even deep self-reflection when making a personal decision.
Yeah.
It's about gathering intelligence and understanding the landscape, whatever that landscape may be.
Okay, so knowledge is power. But since it wasn't just about playing defense, was he? He also talked a lot about the importance of deception.
He did. He even said, be subtle, and use your spies for every kind of business.
Mm.
He illustrated this with stories like the one about Suma, a general who used deception to his advantage during his rapid march on Xinjiang.
So he essentially tricked his enemy into thinking he was still far away. That's pretty crafty. I wonder, though, is there a line between strategy and outright manipulation?
Well, that's a question that's been debated for centuries.
Yeah.
But for Sun Tzu, deception was a tool. And like any tool, it can be used for good or for ill.
Right.
The key takeaway is that understanding your opponent's expectations and using them to your advantage is a powerful tactic, whether you're on a battlefield or in a boardroom.
It makes you think about all those misdirection plays in sports.
Yeah.
Or even in advertising. Maybe we're all playing a bit of Sun Tzu's game without even realizing it. But speaking of maneuvering, Sun Tzu also stressed the importance of speed and adaptability, didn't he?
Oh, he absolutely did. He famously stated that rapidity is the essence of war. And the idea was to exploit the enemy's unreadiness, to strike when they least expect it.
Like Napoleon's swift maneuvers and Lord Roberts's night marches, I can see how that element of surprise could completely change the game.
Exactly. But while speed is crucial, Sun Tzu also recognized that the battlefield itself can be a weapon. That's where his analysis of terrain comes in. He meticulously analyzed different types of ground, mountains, forests, narrow passes, and how a skilled general could use the landscape to their advantage.
So it's not just about brute force, it's about using your surroundings strategically.
Exactly. He provides this fascinating anecdote about the successful defense of Chimo, where a smaller force used psychological warfare and exploited the city's layout to outsmart a much larger attacking force.
That sounds like something straight out of a movie. But Sun Tzu wasn't just focused on battlefield tactics. He also understood the importance of managing soldiers and cultivating a unified fighting force.
Absolutely. Discipline, clear orders, and inspiring courage in your troops. These were all key elements that he stressed. And he wasn't afraid to lead by example, even going as far as to condemn himself to death for breaking his own rule about damaging crops, as your source describes.
Wow, that's a pretty extreme way to demonstrate discipline. While that level of strictness might seem a bit archaic today, it does make you think about the importance of leading with integrity even when it's difficult. But how does this ancient wisdom translate to our modern world? It seems like a pretty big leap from battlefield strategy to, well, everything else.
That's what's so fascinating about the art of war.
Mm-hmm.
These principles, while rooted in ancient warfare, have a surprising amount of relevance in the modern world. Let's start with the digital battlefield, cyber warfare. Think about Sun Tzu's emphasis on spies and intelligence gathering. It's incredibly relevant in the digital age. In cyber warfare, knowing your enemy could mean understanding their hacking techniques, their vulnerabilities, even their motivations.
So how does that translate to the real world? Are we talking about like actual hackers infiltrating systems?
Absolutely. Your source highlights this fascinating parallel between Sun Tzu's concept of converted spies and modern-day hacking tactics. Think about it. A converted spy works for you, but pretends to be on the enemy side.
It's like a double agent in a spy movie.
Exactly. And in cyber warfare, you see similar tactics, where hackers might infiltrate a system, gain access to sensitive information while appearing to be legitimate users. It's a high-stakes game of deception and counterintelligence.
It's pretty mind-blowing to think that these ancient ideas about espionage are still relevant in the digital age. But Sun Tzu's principles aren't limited to the world of spies and cyber warfare, are they?
Not at all. Think about the business world. Competition in the marketplace can feel like a battle sometimes.
Tell me about it. I've definitely had my share of negotiation battles that felt pretty intense.
And in that arena, Sun Tzu's insights are incredibly valuable. Knowing your competition, strategizing your moves, anticipating your opponent's tactics.
Yeah.
These are all principles that apply just as much in a boardroom as they do in a battlefield.
So are you saying that CEOs should be studying the art of war? I can see how that might raise a few eyebrows.
It might sound a bit unconventional, but there's a reason why the art of war had been a mainstay in business schools for decades. It offers a framework for strategic thinking that transcends its military origins. Take Sun Tzu's concept of deviation, making a seemingly unrelated move to throw your rivals off balance. Imagine a company that suddenly launches a product in a completely different market.
Oh.
It seems to come out of nowhere.
So it's like a feint in fencing. You draw your opponent's attention away from your real target.
Exactly. That kind of strategic maneuvering can give you a real advantage in a negotiation or a competitive situation.
It's making me rethink my whole approach to business. But you mentioned that Sun Tzu's wisdom isn't limited to grand-scale conflicts or high-stakes business deals. What did you mean by that?
The art of war can even be applied to personal growth and decision-making.
Oh, okay.
Sun Tzu's emphasis on self-awareness, careful planning, and taking calculated action. These things resonate deeply with the challenges that we all face in our everyday lives.
So we can actually use the art of war to win at life. That's an interesting concept.
Think about it. How often do we rush into decisions without fully understanding the situation or without taking the time to assess our own strengths and weaknesses?
Oh, all the time. I'm definitely guilty of that. Are you saying that Sun Tzu would encourage us to slow down and think strategically before making a move?
Absolutely. He would also emphasize the importance of being adaptable, ready to adjust your course when the situation demands it. And let's be honest, life throws us curveballs all the time.
Yeah.
So,
It's funny we started this deep dive talking about war as a calculated act with a defined objective, and now we're talking about applying those same principles to our personal lives. It seems like Sun Tzu is really onto something about the nature of strategy itself, no matter the context.
exactly. The art of war isn't just a military manual. It's a framework for understanding conflict, competition, and even our own decision-making processes.
Yeah, it's definitely given me a lot to think about. But looking back at your sources, it's clear that the art of war has been interpreted and applied in so many different ways throughout history. It wasn't just about winning battles, it was almost like a philosophical text.
You're right. Your sources even mention how the art of war was considered essential reading for educated elites for centuries. Knowledge of military strategy wasn't just a matter of practical skill, but a mark of refinement and intellectual depth.
So they weren't just studying it to become generals.
No, they saw it as a way to understand human nature, the dynamics of power, and the complexities of the world. And that's why it continues to resonate with people today, even those who have no interest in military matters. Its principles have been applied to everything from business negotiations to personal development.
It's like the art of war became this universal language for talking about strategy and conflict. It's kind of amazing how these ancient ideas have transcended their original context and found new life in so many different fields. It makes you wonder if Sun Tzu himself could have ever imagined the lasting impact of his work.
It's a testament to the enduring power of his insights. But even more fascinating is that his work continues to be studied and adapted by modern military thinkers. Your sources mention Colonel John Boyd, a fighter pilot who actually developed theories about agility and maneuver warfare based on his study of the art of war.
Wait, so these ancient principles are still shaping military doctrine in the 21st century?
Absolutely. Boyd even developed a concept known as the ODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act, which emphasizes the importance of speed and adaptability in decision-making. It's like a modern-day interpretation of Sun Tzu's core principles.
It's incredible to think that an ancient text can still be so relevant to modern warfare, but I have to admit the technology involved in today's conflicts is so advanced, it's hard to imagine how these ancient principles could still apply.
That's a fair point. But your sources offer an incredible example from the Korean War, where the movement of 130,000 Chinese soldiers went completely undetected by American intelligence.
They were basically invisible. How is that even possible?
They use a combination of superb fieldcraft and camouflage, avoiding any of the conventional signs of military movement that the Americans were looking for. It was a masterclass in deception and surprise.
So even though Sun Tzu could never have imagined the technology involved in modern warfare, his core principles were still at play.
Exactly. It shows that while the tools of warfare may change, the underlying principles of strategy and deception remain remarkably consistent.
It makes you wonder, what would Sun Tzu think of modern warfare? Would he be amazed by the technology? Or would he recognize the same patterns of human behavior that he observed centuries ago?
That's a fascinating question, and it brings us to another point. Even though we've been talking about the art of war in all these different contexts, military, business, personal, tree, it's important to remember that it originated in a very specific historical context.
You're right, times have definitely changed since Sun Tzu's day. But is there anything we can learn from the historical context of the art of war that might help us understand it better?
One of your sources highlights the fact that warfare in Sun Tzu's time was often very ritualistic and focused on minimizing casualties. There was a strong emphasis on honor and avoiding unnecessary bloodshed.
That's so different from our modern perception of war. It seems like the focus has shifted from minimizing casualties to maximizing destruction.
It's a complex evolution, and it's important to understand that historical context when reading Sun Tzu. Some of his principles might seem ruthless or even contradictory to modern sensibilities.
Like his willingness to use deception or even to sacrifice spies to achieve his objectives.
Exactly. But it's crucial to remember that he was writing from a very different perspective, one shaped by the realities of warfare in his time.
So are you saying that we should be cautious about applying Sun Tzu's principles directly to our modern world? That some of his ideas might be outdated or even dangerous if taken out of context?
That's a very important point. It's not about blindly following Sun Tzu's every word. It's about understanding the underlying principles and adapting them thoughtfully to our modern challenges.
So it's less about a set of rules and more about a way of thinking, a way of approaching strategy and conflict in any situation.
Exactly. And that's what makes the art of war so valuable, even after all these centuries. It's not a blueprint, but a catalyst for strategic thinking.
It's definitely challenged me to think differently about strategy, both in the big picture sense and in my own life.
And that's the beauty of exploring a text like The Art of War. It's a journey of discovery, both intellectual and personal.
Speaking of journeys, this deep dive has taken us to some unexpected places. We've covered everything from ancient battlefields to modern boardrooms to the inner workings of our own minds.
It's been quite an adventure, but we've only just scratched the surface of the art of war. There's so much more to explore in this fascinating and thought-provoking text.
Well, I'm feeling inspired to keep digging, and I bet our listeners are too.
If Sun Tzu were alive today, I wonder what he would make of our modern world. What battlefields would he be studying? What strategies would he be analyzing?
Those are great questions to ponder. It makes you realize that the art of strategy is all around us, even if we don't always see it.
And that's the real legacy of the art of war. It's not just a military text. It's a timeless guide to understanding the complexities of human interaction.
It really is. It's amazing how much we can learn from something that's over 2,000 years old.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, though, if Suns were alive today, I mean, what would he think of our modern world? Like, what battlefields would he be studying? What strategies would he be analyzing?
Now, those are some thought-provoking questions. What stands out to you from all this?
Honestly, I think I'm struck by the contrast between Sun Tzu's emphasis on minimizing casualties and like the way we tend to think about warfare today.
Hmm.
It's like the focus has shifted from like honor and strategic maneuvering to, well, almost a kind of technological arms race.
You've hit on a key point. The evolution of warfare is a very complex topic, but it's crucial to consider that historical context when we're reading The Art of War. Some of Sun Tzu's principles might seem ruthless or even contradictory to our modern sensibilities.
Right? Like his willingness to use deception or even to sacrifice spies to achieve his objectives. It makes you wonder, can we really apply these ancient ideas to our modern world without some serious ethical considerations?
Yeah, it's not about blindly following Sun Tzu's every word.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that the world has changed and adapting those principles thoughtfully to our modern challenges.
Right.
The Art of War offers us a framework for understanding strategy and
Mhm.
conflict, but it's up to us to apply that framework ethically and responsibly.
It's like a toolbox. You wouldn't
Right.
use a hammer for every job, right? You have to choose the right tool for the situation.
Exactly. And the same goes for the principles that we find in The Art of War. It's about understanding those underlying concepts and applying them in a way that makes sense for our world today.
So it's less about a set of rules and more about like a way of thinking, a way of approaching strategy and conflict in any situation. It's about understanding your goals, assessing your resources, and making those calculated decisions. And maybe even outsmarting your opponent with a little bit of cleverness.
And a little bit of luck.
Yeah, a little bit of luck never hurts.
Never hurts.
Yeah.
It's a journey of discovery, both intellectual and personal. This deep dive has certainly been an eye-opener for me, and I hope it has been for our listeners too.
I think it's safe to say that The Art of War is not just a dusty old military manual. It's a timeless exploration of human nature, strategy, and the complexities of conflict. And while we might not all be facing armies on a battlefield, the principles we've discussed today can help us navigate the battlefields of our own lives.
You got it. Remember, even in a world that's striving for peace, understanding the principles of conflict can be a powerful tool for navigating those complexities of life.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into The Art of War.
Until next time.
Stay strategic.